So one of the problems that we faced was a relatively large number of committees. Each of our programs has a governance committee. There's an oversight committee for that. There were 5 or 6 advisory committees, some task forces that had never stopped. So kind of committee creep. And we're, as a small college, this wasn't really feasible. So the challenge was, how do we maintain faculty governance and involvement, but make good use of available time. So to address this, one of the things I did was essentially a review of all the committees. We constructed a list that had every committee, every assignment, every university committee that faculty members were on, every task force that people thought was still active or not active, in addition to kind of service roles and other things that people did. This ended up in a spreadsheet. I think if I remember correctly, when we started, it had 400 entries. And so the 3 things we did, one was kind of a rigorous check of university committee assignments and representation to find out which things were really active, and which things our faculty were making significant contributions to. And that was just allowing us to distinguish which ones are representation and which ones are substantive long-term work. Within the college, we looked at the governance committees and made sure that those were functioning the right way, and so essentially changed the charges to most of the committees, so that they had a clearer idea of what they were doing and why faculty were involved in them. And then we also looked at the existing advisory committees and the governance committees and checked to see how large they needed to be. We shut down some committees. I'm trying to think of a good example. We had the online programs committee that hadn't met. We had a Shady Grove committee that met but hadn't really done anything. So these are things that over time had kind of stopped making sense, even though we still do online in Shady Grove. It's just that didn't make sense as a way of organizing them. For the program committees, we cut back on the faculty involvement in that because those are largely administrative. The governance is of the oversight at the college level. We actually increased the involvement of faculty in the highest level governance committee, and said the administrative program committees would do a first pass to make sure things made sense, and that the governance discussion really was going to be at the higher level because things were already going through 2 levels. And then there were a couple of cases where we combined things. So we had an external relations and communications advisory group that previously had been 2 groups. So by combining it, we cut down on the number of people involved. So the idea, again, was to try and maintain governance, oversight of things where that was critical, make sure that when faculty time was being used, it was being put to some reasonable purpose. And then in the cases where it was just representation, making sure that everybody involved understood that the expectation wasn't someone doing 20 hours a month. It was come to the meeting and pay attention and represent the interests that you're representing. And then all of this was supported by kind of the list that I described being made into somewhat of a dashboard so that people could get better expectations about what other people were doing. And this was 2 things. One is so that when people were assigned things and they said, well, other people are doing a lot more, they could tell if that was actually accurate. We found in some cases that there were individuals that were absolutely correct. In fact, in a couple of cases, I told people to stop. It's like, you had to pick, are you going to do this or this? Because they had too many. But in 5 or 6 other cases, it was individuals who were absolutely convinced that everyone else was doing way more than they were, and they were either very typical, or in one case, they actually weren't doing very much at all. So again, it was a calibration of expectations to go along with an adjustment of the structures. I guess there were kind of 3 things. One is I did have a significant number of faculty when I did my first rounds of interviews or discussions with them individually that commented on committee work and service work as being something that was a big problem or a challenge or something that they wanted to try and have to manage better. And later in the year, when I kind of revisited that, a lot of people had said that they thought it was working much better. So there was a perception that it was working much better. When we did the specific charges, I think it actually resulted in some of the programs and some of the committees actually getting further in the course of a year. And then the third thing was there were individuals that I think were more willing to take on things as they came up throughout the year. Either because they had felt like they were heard, so something they had asked to be on fewer things, or because they had more time, and that they had a better idea of what the expectation was. So ultimately, I think it worked better in terms of both the individuals and the college as a whole.